Good morning and welcome. Imagine for a moment you're shopping and you find a t-shirt or a toy that is surprisingly inexpensive. You might feel pleased with the bargain, but perhaps a small, uncomfortable question flickers in your mind. How can it possibly be this cheap? That question leads us directly to our topic today, a dilemma that sits at the intersection of economics, human rights, and our own daily choices. Is it ethical to buy products made with child labor? This is a subject with no easy answers. To help us navigate this complex terrain, we have two distinguished guests with us. First, we have Ms. Aisha Sharma, a renowned human rights advocate. She argues for a clear moral line, asserting that any participation in the chain of child labor is unacceptable. And offering a different perspective is Mr. Ben Carter, a development economist. He urges us to consider the pragmatic realities and the potential unintended consequences of our actions on the very communities we wish to help. Our goal today is not to find a simple verdict, but to explore the nuances of this profound ethical challenge. Ms. Sharma, let's begin with you.
Thank you, Evelyn. The conversation must begin from a place of absolute clarity. Child labor is a fundamental violation of human rights. It is the theft of a childhood, the robbery of an education, and the destruction of a future. We are not discussing a child helping with family chores after school. Let's be precise. The International Labor Organization defines child labor as work that is mentally, physically, socially, or morally dangerous and harmful to children. It is work that interferes with their schooling by depriving them of the opportunity to attend, obliging them to leave school prematurely, or requiring them to attempt to combine school attendance with excessively long and heavy work. The core of my argument is this: consumer demand directly fuels and sustains the market for this exploitation. Every purchase of a product made under these conditions sends a clear, powerful message to corporations and manufacturers. That message is that these practices are profitable, that they are acceptable, and that we, the consumers, are willing to look the other way for a lower price. I like to think of it as a chain of culpability. The factory owner who employs children is culpable. The multinational corporation that outsources production to that factory to cut costs is culpable. But the chain does not end there. The consumer who knowingly purchases the final product is the final, crucial link that keeps the entire system intact. By paying for the product, you are, in a very real sense, paying the child's exploiter. Often I hear the argument that these families have no other choice, that this work is better than nothing. This is a dangerous and self-serving justification. Accepting exploitation as a necessary evil only perpetuates the cycle of poverty. It allows governments and corporations to abdicate their responsibility to create sustainable livelihoods and social safety nets. The ethical response is not to become a participant in the problem. It is to demand systemic change. Our convenience can never, and should never, be weighed against the cost of a child's life and future. The only ethical choice is refusal.
Mr. Carter, a very powerful moral argument from Ms. Sharma. How do you respond?
Thank you. I want to begin by acknowledging the moral force of Aisha's position. Let me be perfectly clear. In an ideal world, no child would be forced to work in a factory or a field. Child labor is not a desirable outcome. It is a symptom of a much deeper disease, and that disease is extreme poverty. My perspective is not about defending the practice itself, but about questioning the effectiveness and consequences of our proposed solutions. The issue is not one of good versus evil, but of choosing between bad options and potentially worse ones. The core of my argument is that for many families in the world's poorest regions, a child's income is not for buying video games or new clothes. It is the marginal income that determines whether the family eats a meal or goes hungry. A sudden, widespread consumer boycott, driven by our understandable moral outrage, can have catastrophic unintended consequences. When a factory loses its Western contracts, it doesn't suddenly start paying its adult workers more. It lays people off, and the first to go are often the very children we intended to help. We have seen this happen. There was a well-documented case in the 1990s concerning the garment industry in Bangladesh. A proposed boycott in the U.S. led to factories dismissing an estimated 50,000 children to preempt the legislation. A follow-up study found that these children did not go back to school. They ended up in far more dangerous, unregulated work: stone crushing, street hustling, and even prostitution. They became invisible to us, and their situations went from bad to far, far worse. This is where the principle of harm reduction becomes critical. The most ethical action is the one that leads to the least amount of human suffering. A nuanced approach that supports businesses actively working to improve standards, that invests in local education, and that contributes to broad-based economic development is slower and less satisfying, but ultimately more effective than a blunt boycott. Our consumer power should not be a weapon to punish the vulnerable, but a tool to incentivize and support positive gradual change. The goal must be to make a child's labor unnecessary, not simply to make it invisible to our Western eyes.
Aisha, Ben raises a critical point about unintended consequences. How do you respond to the very real risk that a boycott could push a child from a regulated factory, however exploitative, into something far more dangerous like street work? Is a principled stand worth that potential harm?
This framing presents a false choice, and it's a narrative that corporations that profit from exploitation are very keen to promote. It suggests that our only options are a, quote, factory job or a worse life on the streets. This completely absolves the most powerful actors, corporations, and governments of their responsibilities. The correct response to the threat of children ending up in worse situations is not to keep them in exploitative factories. It is to demand that these billion-dollar companies and the governments they operate in create the necessary safety nets. They should fund transitional programs, ensure school access, and provide family support. The pressure from consumer boycotts is precisely what forces these powerful entities to the table. The consumer's moral responsibility is not to choose the lesser of two evils. It is to refuse to participate in evil altogether and, by doing so, force the system to generate a good option.
Ben, turning to you. Your pragmatic approach could be interpreted by some as a justification for continued exploitation. If we continue to buy these products from companies that are improving, where is the real pressure for them to change quickly? Where do you draw the line between pragmatic support and simply condoning child labor under the guise of gradual improvement?
That's a fair and essential question. The line is drawn at transparency and verifiable progress. It's the difference between engagement and endorsement. I would never advocate for simply buying products without scrutiny. The ethical consumer, in my view, has a duty to do their homework. The line is drawn when a company refuses to be transparent about its supply chain. It's drawn when they cannot provide credible, independently audited plans for how they are improving wages and factory conditions. The pressure isn't removed, it's redirected. Instead of a blunt "I won't buy," it becomes a sharp "I will only buy if you show me the steps you are taking to raise wages for adult workers so they don't need to send their children to work." It's about supporting companies on a positive trajectory and divesting from those who refuse to engage. It's a conditional support that fosters improvement, rather than a blanket punishment that can inadvertently harm the innocent.
Let's make this more practical for our listeners. We often see labels like fair trade or other ethical certifications. Are these a reliable tool for consumers, or are they sometimes just a marketing ploy?
They are a step in the right direction, but they are not a panacea. On one hand, certifications can provide a valuable shortcut for consumers, indicating that a product has met certain minimum standards regarding labor and environmental practices. However, the system is imperfect. The auditing process can sometimes be weak, and there have been instances of fraud. More importantly, it can create a niche market for quote, ethical goods, while allowing the mainstream industry to continue its exploitative practices unchanged. We should support them, but with a critical eye, and continue to demand that ethical production becomes the standard, not the premium exception.
I would agree that they are an imperfect but useful tool. From an economic standpoint, these labels represent market-based solutions. They allow consumers to, quote, vote with their wallets, and provide a clear financial incentive for producers to adopt better practices. They demonstrate that a segment of the market is willing to pay more for ethically produced goods, which can drive wider industry change over time. The key is for these certification bodies to maintain rigorous standards and for consumers to understand what each specific label actually guarantees.
We have time for some final thoughts from each of you. Ms. Sharma, your closing statement.
As we conclude, I urge you to hold on to the fundamental principle we began with. A child's right to a safe, healthy, and educated childhood is non-negotiable. Progress and profit should never be built on the broken backs of children. The arguments for a pragmatic approach, while sounding reasonable, often serve to dilute our moral responsibility. They ask us to accept a degree of injustice in the name of preventing a hypothetical worse outcome. I ask you not to let the complexity of the problem become an excuse for moral inaction. Your choices matter. Your voice matters. Demand transparency. Ask hard questions of the brands you support. Accept that a t-shirt made without exploitation may cost a few dollars more, but understand that this is not a quote-quote premium. It is the just price of human dignity. Let us not be the final link in the chain of exploitation.
Thank you. Mr. Carter, your final thoughts.
I want to leave you not with an easy answer, but with a more effective question. Instead of asking, should I boycott, I encourage you to ask, how can my purchasing power best contribute to the conditions that make child labor obsolete? Emotionally driven reactions, like boycotts, feel righteous but can fail the very people they are meant to save. An evidence-based approach is more difficult, but also more compassionate. The true enemy here is not a specific factory, but poverty itself. So become an educated consumer. Research the brands that are genuinely investing in their workers and communities. Support development initiatives that build schools and create stable adult employment. Understand your purchase not as a simple transaction, but as an investment in the kind of world you wish to build. A world where every family is stable and prosperous enough that their children's only job is to learn, play, and grow.
Thank you both. Ms. Aisha Sharma and Mr. Ben Carter, thank you for illuminating the profound conflict between a rights-based moral imperative and a consequences-based pragmatic approach. We have heard the passionate call to refuse all complicity in a system of exploitation, and we have heard the reasoned plea to avoid actions that, while well-intentioned, may cause even greater harm. Ultimately, the decision rests with each of us. The next time you stand in a store, faced with a choice, remember that you are not just a consumer, but an ethical actor. What will you choose to do?